The fluorescent lights hummed overhead in the emergency department of Riverside Veterans Medical Center, casting harsh shadows across the linoleum floor. Captain Sarah Mitchell, United States Navy Nurse Corps, stood at the nurses' station, her crisp khaki uniform pressed to perfection, her dark hair pulled back in a regulation bun. At 34 years old, she carried herself with the quiet dignity of someone who'd earned her place through years of service, not favors or shortcuts. But nobody in this civilian hospital seemed to care about that. "Excuse me, sweetheart," Dr. Richard Brennan said, brushing past her without making eye contact. "Can you grab me a coffee? 2 sugars, light cream." Sarah's jaw tightened, but she kept her voice steady. "Dr. Brennan, I'm Captain Mitchell, the new trauma nurse. I was actually reviewing the incoming patient roster." Right, he interrupted, already walking away. "Coffee first. We've got a system here and you're going to need to learn how things work before you start making suggestions." 3 other nurses at the station exchanged glances. Linda, a veteran nurse with 20 years at Riverside, didn't even try to hide her smirk. "Don't take it personally, honey. We've seen plenty of military nurses rotate through here. You all think your battlefield experience makes you special, but this is real medicine. This is America, not some desert outpost." Sarah felt the familiar burn of injustice in her chest, the same feeling she'd fought against her entire career. She'd served 2 tours in Afghanistan, treating Marines and soldiers under fire, performing emergency procedures in conditions these civilian nurses couldn't imagine. She'd held dying 19-year-olds in her arms, had run trauma bays in forward operating bases with mortar rounds exploding 50 yards away. But she wouldn't say any of that, she never did. "Understood," Sarah said simply, turning back to her charts. The morning continued in the same vein. When she suggested a different approach to an IV placement, she was ignored. When she questioned a medication dosage that seemed off, she was told to stay in her lane. By lunch, she'd been mistaken for a medical assistant twice and asked to empty bedpans by a patient who assumed she was an aide. Sarah ate her sandwich alone in the break room, staring at the photo on her phone. Her father, Gunnery Sergeant Thomas Mitchell, USMC, in his dress blues. He'd passed away 3 years ago, but she could still hear his voice. "Stand tall, Sarah girl, don't let the bastards see you flinch." She didn't plan to. The afternoon brought a slight reprieve. Sarah was assigned to triage, where at least she could work independently, assessing incoming patients without constant supervision. She fell into the familiar rhythm: temperature, blood pressure, chief complaint, pain scale. One after another, she processed the steady stream of minor emergencies and chronic complaints. "Next patient," she called out. An elderly man shuffled forward, his disabled American veteran's cap sitting crooked on his white hair. "Name's Bill Henderson, ma'am. Got this cough that won't quit." Sarah looked up and smiled, a real smile, the first all day. "Thank you for your service, Mr. Henderson. Let's get you checked out." As she took his vitals, they talked. "Korea," he said, "artillery unit." He asked about her background, and when she mentioned the Navy, his eyes lit up. "Navy nurse? Well, God bless you. My daughter wanted to be a nurse, but—" His voice trailed off, and Sarah saw the pain there, old and deep. "She would have been wonderful, I'm sure," Sarah said gently. Bill nodded. "She would have been. Cancer took her when she was 26. That's why I come here to the VA, feel closer to her somehow, with all you young people in uniform helping folks." Sarah squeezed his weathered hand. "You honor her memory just by being here, sir. Now let's see about that cough." She spent extra time with Bill, listening to his lungs, asking detailed questions about his symptoms. Something felt off. The cough was deep, rattling, and he admitted he'd been more tired than usual. She noted a slight fever, barely elevated, but there. "Mr. Henderson, I'd like to have the doctor order a chest X-ray just to be safe." Bill waved her off. Don't make a fuss, it's probably just a cold." "Humor me," Sarah said with a kind smile. "Navy nurses' orders." She flagged down Dr. Brennan, explained her concerns. He barely looked at Henderson's chart. "He's got a cough, it's November, give him a prescription for antibiotics and send him home." "Sir, with respect, his presentation suggests possible pneumonia. His oxygen saturation is borderline, and given his age and history." "Captain Mitchell?" Brennan said, his voice dropping to that condescending tone she'd heard too many times today. "I've been practicing emergency medicine for 15 years. This is a simple upper respiratory infection. We don't order unnecessary tests just because you've got a hunch." Sarah's hands clenched at her sides, but she kept her face neutral. "Yes, doctor." She returned to Bill with the prescription but also gave him explicit instructions. Mr. Henderson, if your fever goes up, if you have any trouble breathing, any chest pain, you come right back here. Don't wait, promise me. The old veteran studied her face and nodded slowly. You got good instincts, young lady, I promise. The rest of the shift passed in a blur of dismissal and disrespect. By the time Sarah clocked out at 7 p.m., she felt exhausted in a way that had nothing to do with physical tiredness. She'd run 18-hour shifts in combat zones and felt less drained than she did after 8 hours in this sterile, hostile environment. She drove home to her small apartment on the outskirts of Riverside, a quiet town in central Virginia where the military hospital had recently partnered with the local VA to share resources. It was supposed to be a good assignment, a chance to transition back to civilian life while still serving veterans. Instead, it felt like fighting a new kind of war, one where her enemy was pride, ignorance, and prejudice. That night, Sarah lay awake thinking about Bill Henderson, about Dr. Brennan's dismissal, about Linda's smirk. She thought about all the times in her career she'd been underestimated, doubted, pushed aside. The Navy had taught her to persevere, to prove herself through action rather than words. Tomorrow would be better, she told herself. Tomorrow she'd find a way to make them see. But tomorrow brought something worse. Sarah arrived at 6 a.m. for the day shift, stopping by the locker room to change into fresh scrubs. She just finished tying her shoes when she heard voices in the hallway, Linda and another nurse, Karen. Did you see her yesterday, acting like she runs the place? Military types are always like that, all that rank goes to their heads. She probably just emptied bedpans on some Navy ship and thinks she's a real nurse. Brennan put her in her place at least, about time someone did. Sarah sat perfectly still, her hands resting on her knees. She could walk out there, confront them, defend herself. But what would that accomplish? They'd made up their minds about who she was before she'd even introduced herself. Instead, she stood, squared her shoulders, and walked out with her head high. Linda and Karen fell silent as she passed, and Sarah gave them a polite nod. Good morning, ladies. The morning started routinely enough. Sarah was assigned to the critical care bay, monitoring patients recovering from various procedures. She checked vitals, administered medications, documented everything with the meticulous attention to detail the Navy had drilled into her. At 8:47 hours, the ambulance bay doors crashed open. Incoming trauma, the paramedic's voice echoed through the ER. Male, 62, unconscious, possible cardiac event. Sarah was moving before anyone else, her training kicking in instantly. She reached the gurney as they wheeled it through, her eyes rapidly assessing the patient. Marine Corps tattoo on his forearm, the eagle, globe, and anchor, and his face. Her heart stopped. Bill Henderson. Talk to me, Sarah said, falling into step with the paramedics, her voice calm despite the fear clawing at her chest. Found him collapsed at home, neighbor called it in. BP 70/40 and dropping, respiration shallow, fever of 103. We've got him on oxygen, started a line. Get him to Trauma 1, Sarah ordered, then caught herself. She wasn't in charge here, Dr. Brennan was. But Brennan was nowhere in sight. Linda appeared, took one look at the situation, and her face went pale. Where's the doctor? He's with another patient, someone called out, 5 minutes out. 5 minutes, Sarah looked at Bill Henderson's ashen face, saw his chest barely rising and falling. 5 minutes was too long. Start a second IV wide open, Sarah said, moving to the head of the gurney. I need labs, chest x-ray, and someone page cardiology now. You can't just, Linda started. Either help me or get out of my way, Sarah said, and there was something in her voice, command, certainty, the voice of someone who'd made life-or-death decisions under fire that made Linda step back. Sarah's hands moved with practiced precision. She'd done this 100 times in worse conditions with fewer resources under active combat. Here she had everything she needed: equipment, electricity, a full team. Oxygen stats dropping, Karen called out, and Sarah could hear the panic creeping into her voice. Switch him to non-rebreather, 15 liters, Sarah instructed, and somebody get me that x-ray stat, I need to see his lungs. The doctor has to order. I'll take responsibility, move. The x-ray tech scrambled, and seconds later the portable machine was in position. Sarah stepped back while they took the image, her mind racing through differential diagnoses. Yesterday's cough, the low-grade fever, the fatigue, she'd been right. Pneumonia. Severe by the look of him, probably septic by now. The X-ray came up on the screen and Sarah's worst fears were confirmed. Both lungs showed significant infiltration. Bilateral pneumonia advanced. He needs antibiotics, broad spectrum right now, Sarah said, and we need to. The monitor's alarm shrieked. Bill Henderson was coding. He's in VFib, Karen shouted. Sarah's world narrowed to the patient in front of her, to the training that had been burned into her muscle memory through years of service and dozens of emergencies. Start compressions. Someone charged the defibrillator to 200 joules. She was vaguely aware of the chaos around her, nurses scrambling, someone calling for the doctor again, Linda frozen in the doorway. None of it mattered. Clear, Sarah called and delivered the first shock. Bill's body jerked, the monitor showed a brief flutter, then settled back into that deadly rhythm. Continue compressions, charge to 300, push 1 milligram of epinephrine. 30 seconds, 1 minute, where the hell was Brennan? Clear. Another shock, this time nothing, the line stayed flat. Sarah's hands moved automatically, compressions, breath, another round of epinephrine. She could feel sweat on her forehead, could hear someone crying somewhere in the background. But all she could see was Bill Henderson's face from yesterday, the way he'd talked about his daughter, the trust in his eyes when he'd promised to come back if things got worse. He'd kept that promise, and she'd send him home. I need an airway kit, Sarah said, her voice steady even as her heart pounded. We're intubating. Captain Mitchell, Dr. Brennan's voice cut through the organized chaos. He'd finally arrived. Step aside. Sarah didn't move. Sir, he's been down for 2 minutes, we need to. I said step aside, Captain, that's an order. For a split second, Sarah's hands hesitated. Military training ward with medical instinct. Rank structure versus patient care, orders versus conscience. She stepped aside. Brennan took over and Sarah watched with her heart in her throat as he ran the code. He did everything by the book, adequate, competent, correct, but she could see the outcome before it happened. They'd lost too much time, Bill was too far gone. After 15 minutes, Brennan called it. Time of death 9:19 hours. The room fell silent except for the steady flatline beep of the monitor. Sarah stood frozen, staring at the sheet they'd pulled over Bill Henderson's body. Over the old Marine who'd served his country, who'd lost his daughter, who'd come to this hospital trusting them to help him. Who she'd failed. Everyone out, Brennan said quietly. I'll handle the paperwork. Sarah walked out of Trauma 1 on legs that didn't feel quite steady. She made it to the supply closet before the tears came, silent, burning tears that she wiped away quickly. Navy nurses didn't cry, not where people could see. But alone in the dark, surrounded by sterile packages and cleaning supplies, Sarah allowed herself 1 minute of grief. For Bill Henderson, for his daughter who'd wanted to be a nurse, for every veteran who deserved better than what this system was giving them. Then she dried her eyes, straightened her uniform, and walked back out. Linda was waiting at the nurse's station, and her expression was complex: shame, anger, and something that might have been grudging respect. The family's here, she said quietly. Brennan's talking to them. Sarah nodded. She started to walk away, but Linda's voice stopped her. You were right yesterday about the pneumonia. Sarah turned back. It doesn't matter now. Yeah, Linda said softly, it does. The rest of the shift passed in a blur. Sarah mechanically completed her duties, documented her charts, avoided Dr. Brennan, when 7 p.m. finally came. She changed out of her scrubs and walked to her car. She sat in the driver's seat for a long moment before starting the engine. Her phone buzzed, a text from her sister. How was your second day? Sarah stared at the message, then typed back, fine, just tired. The lies we tell, she thought, the things we carry alone. As she drove home through Riverside's quiet streets, past the war memorial in the town square where Bill Henderson's name would someday join other fallen veterans, Sarah made a decision. She wouldn't quit, she wouldn't transfer, she wouldn't let Bill Henderson's death be meaningless. Somehow, someway, she was going to change this place. Even if it destroyed her in the process. Sarah sat in the hospital administrator's office, her uniform immaculate, her spine rigid with the posture of someone who'd stood at attention in front of admirals. Across the desk, Martin Walsh studied her with the calculating eyes of a man who'd spent 30 years managing a medical facility and dealing with complications. "Captain Mitchell," he said, tapping a folder on his desk, "Mr. Henderson's family has filed a formal complaint. They're alleging negligence." Sarah's stomach dropped, but she kept her face neutral. "I see. They claim he came to the ER 2 days before his death with clear symptoms of pneumonia and that he was sent home with inadequate treatment." Walsh leaned back in his chair. "Dr. Brennan says you were the triage nurse that day." "That's correct, sir." "And did you or did you not recommend further testing?" Sarah met his gaze steadily. "I expressed concerns about the patient's presentation and suggested a chest X-ray. Dr. Brennan made the clinical decision to treat conservatively." Walsh's expression didn't change. "Dr. Brennan has been with this hospital for 15 years, he's a respected physician, and you've been here less than a week." He paused, letting that sink in. "The family is specifically nomming you in their complaint. They say you were the last person to give their father instructions and they want to know why you didn't do more." The injustice of it hit Sarah like a physical blow. She'd fought for Bill Henderson. She'd pushed back against Brennan, and now she was being blamed for his death while the doctor who'd overruled her walked free. "I understand," Sarah said quietly. "You're being placed on administrative leave effective immediately, pending the completion of our internal review." Walsh stood, signaling the meeting was over. "Turn in your badge at the front desk. We'll be in touch." Sarah left the office with her head high, but inside she felt like she was crumbling. Administrative leave. The words followed her through the hallways where nurses whispered and pointed. She could see it in their eyes, validation. The military nurse had screwed up just like they'd expected. At the front desk, she handed over her badge to Linda, who at least had the decency to look uncomfortable. "Sarah, I'm sorry, this isn't—" "It's fine," Sarah interrupted. She couldn't handle sympathy right now, not from someone who'd mocked her days earlier. She walked out of Riverside Veterans Medical Center into the cold November afternoon, unemployed for the first time since she'd enlisted at 18. The next 2 weeks were the longest of Sarah's life. She spent the first few days in her apartment, replaying the Henderson case over and over. She pulled her personal notes, reviewed every detail of his initial presentation. She'd been right, everything in his symptoms had screamed pneumonia, but being right didn't matter when you were a junior nurse questioning a senior doctor. The Navy had taught her that rank mattered, that hierarchy kept chaos at bay. But they'd also taught her that leadership meant protecting those under your command, that officers bore responsibility for their decisions. Dr. Brennan had made the call, but Sarah was the one paying the price. On the 4th day of her suspension, Sarah received a letter from Bill Henderson's daughter, Amanda. It was handwritten, 3 pages long, and it broke Sarah's heart. "Dear Captain Mitchell, I wanted to write to you personally, even though my lawyer advised against it. I need you to understand something. My father talked about you that night. He came home from the hospital and told me about the Navy nurse who'd taken such good care of him, who'd reminded him of me. He said you had good instincts and that you'd told him to come back if things got worse. He tried, when he woke up struggling to breathe, he tried to get to his phone. The neighbor found him on the floor, reaching for it. He was trying to do what you'd asked. I'm not writing to blame you, I'm writing because my father trusted you and I think you tried to help him. But someone failed him that day and I need to know who. I need to know why my father died from something as treatable as pneumonia in a modern American hospital. Please, if you know anything, if there's anything you can tell me, I just need the truth. Sincerely, Amanda Henderson." Sarah read the letter 3 times, tears streaming down her face. Then she made a decision that would change everything. She called Amanda Henderson. They met at a coffee shop in downtown Riverside, a quiet place where locals read newspapers and retirees played chess. Amanda was a woman in her late 30s with her father's kind eyes and a grief so fresh it seemed to radiate from her. "Thank you for meeting me," Amanda said, her hands wrapped around a coffee cup she hadn't touched. "I know you're not supposed to talk to me." "Probably not," Sarah admitted, "but your father deserves more than silence." For the next hour, Sarah walked Amanda through everything, the initial presentation, her concerns, Dr. Brennan's dismissal, the specific instructions she'd given Bill. She didn't editorialize, didn't try to shift blame, she just told the truth. When she finished, Amanda was crying quietly. "So you knew, you tried to help him." "Not hard enough," Sarah said, her voice rough with guilt. "I should have pushed harder, I should have gone over Dr. Brennan's head, I should have." "You should have been listened to," Amanda interrupted. "You did your job, someone else didn't do theirs." After they parted, Sarah sat in her car and thought about her next move. She could stay quiet, hope the investigation blew over, try to get her job back, or she could do what her father had always taught her, stand up for what was right, consequences be damned. She chose the latter. Sarah spent the next week building a case. She requested copies of her own documentation through official channels. She reviewed hospital protocols, checked treatment guidelines for pneumonia in elderly patients, cross-referenced Dr. Brennan's decisions against accepted standards of care. What she found was disturbing. Bill Henderson wasn't the first patient Brennan had misdiagnosed, in the past year alone. There had been 3 formal complaints against him, all dismissed, all buried in administrative files. The hospital had protected him because he was senior, because he was established, because it was easier than admitting they had a problem. Sarah knew what she had to do, but she also knew the cost. She called the Virginia State Medical Board and filed a formal complaint. Then she contacted the local newspaper, the Riverside Register, and told them she had a story about veteran care at the medical center. The response was immediate and explosive. 2 days later, the Register ran a front-page story: Navy nurse alleges cover-up in veteran's death. They'd interviewed Amanda Henderson, reviewed public records, and found the other complaints against Dr. Brennan. The story painted a damning picture of a hospital more concerned with protecting its reputation than its patients. Sarah's phone started ringing, the hospital's lawyer threatening legal action, the medical board requesting more information, other nurses from Riverside, some supporting her, others calling her a traitor, and reporters, so many reporters. She ignored most of them, but when a producer from a Richmond TV station called asking if she'd go on camera, Sarah said yes. The interview aired that evening. Sarah sat in her dress blues, she'd earned the right to wear them, and spoke calmly, clearly about what had happened to Bill Henderson. "I'm not here to destroy anyone's career," she told the interviewer. "I'm here because we made a promise to our veterans. We promised to care for them when they came home. And we're breaking that promise every time we prioritize ego over evidence, every time we silence the people trying to speak up, every time we protect the system instead of the patients." The anchor leaned forward. "You've sacrificed your career for this, was it worth it?" Sarah thought of her father, of Bill Henderson, of every Marine and soldier she'd treated in makeshift hospitals in Afghanistan. Some things are worth more than a career: honor, truth, the lives we're trusted to protect. So yes, it was worth it. The interview went viral. Within 24 hours, it had been shared across social media, picked up by national news outlets, and sparked a conversation about veteran care across the country. Sarah's phone didn't stop ringing. Veterans groups called to offer support. Lawyers offered to represent her pro bono. Other nurses from other hospitals reached out to share their own stories of being silenced and ignored. But the backlash came too. Someone spray-painted "traitor" on her apartment door. She received threatening emails accusing her of attacking good doctors, of trying to destroy the medical system, of being a glory-seeking fraud. Online trolls found her social media and filled it with hate. And the hospital fought back hard. They released a statement denying any wrongdoing, standing behind Dr. Brennan completely. They suggested that Sarah was a disgruntled employee with a grudge, that her military service didn't qualify her to question civilian medical decisions, that she'd violated patient privacy by speaking out. The attacks were coordinated and brutal, and for a while they seemed to be working. Then the other nurses started coming forward. First it was Karen, who'd been in Trauma 1 when Bill Henderson coded. She gave a sworn statement saying that Sarah had tried to order proper testing, that Brennan had overruled her, that everything could have been prevented. Then it was Linda, bitter, dismissive Linda, who'd mocked Sarah from day one. She stood in front of the hospital with reporters and admitted she'd been wrong. "I didn't want to listen to Captain Mitchell because she was military, because she was young, because I decided she didn't belong here. But she was right, about Mr. Henderson, about Dr. Brennan, about all of it. and I'm ashamed it took an old man dying for me to see it. More came forward, nurses, technicians, even a few doctors who'd been afraid to speak up before. They told stories of a toxic culture at Riverside, of senior physicians who couldn't be questioned, of good medical professionals being pushed out for rocking the boat. The state investigation expanded. The medical board launched a formal review not just of Bill Henderson's case, but of the hospital's entire quality control system. And the Henderson family's lawsuit, which had originally named Sarah, was amended to remove her and focus squarely on Dr. Brennan and the hospital administration. Through it all, Sarah maintained her dignity. She didn't gloat, she didn't attack. She simply kept telling the truth, kept standing up for the principle that had guided her entire career: take care of your people no matter the cost. 6 weeks after Bill Henderson's death, the state medical board released its findings. Dr. Richard Brennan's medical license was suspended pending further review. The hospital was fined and placed under enhanced oversight, and a new protocol was implemented across all Virginia VA facilities. Any clinical concern raised by any medical professional, regardless of rank or seniority, had to be properly documented and addressed. They called it the Henderson Protocol. Sarah learned about it from Amanda, who called her crying. "They're naming it after him, after my dad, so other families won't have to go through what we did." "He'd be proud," Sarah said, her own voice thick with emotion. "He was a Marine. Marines protect people, that's what this does." "He'd be proud of you," Amanda corrected. "I'm proud of you." The hospital offered Sarah her job back, full reinstatement, back pay, a formal apology. Martin Walsh himself delivered the offer, looking uncomfortable but sincere. "We were wrong, Captain Mitchell, about a lot of things, and if you're willing to come back, we'd like the chance to make it right." Sarah considered the offer for a long moment. Part of her wanted to accept, to prove that she could do this job, to continue the fight from inside the system. But another part of her, the part that had spent 2 months being vilified, threatened, and dragged through the mud, was tired. Tired of fighting, tired of proving herself, tired of being underestimated. "Thank you," she said finally, "but no." Walsh blinked, surprised. "May I ask why?" "Because I didn't do this to get my job back," Sarah said. "I did it because it was right, and now that it's done, I need to figure out what comes next." What came next surprised even Sarah. 3 weeks after declining Riverside's offer, she received a call from the Department of Veterans Affairs in Washington, D.C. They wanted to hire her as a special consultant, helping to redesign veteran care protocols and train medical staff on patient advocacy. "We need people who aren't afraid to speak truth to power," the deputy secretary told her. "People who understand both military and civilian medicine. People with integrity. That's you, Captain Mitchell." Sarah accepted. On her last day in Riverside, she visited Bill Henderson's grave. It was a cold December morning, the kind of sharp, clear day her father had always loved. She laid a bouquet of flowers at the headstone, red, white, and blue carnations, the colors he'd served under. "I wish I could have done more," she said quietly, to the stone, to the memory, to the old Marine who'd reminded her why she'd become a nurse in the first place. "But I promise you, what happened to you won't happen to others, not if I can help it." The wind rustled through the cemetery trees, and for just a moment Sarah could have sworn she heard her father's voice. "Stand tall, Sarah girl, you did good." She stood, straightened her coat, and walked back to her car. In the distance, she could see Riverside's Main Street, the war memorial, the hospital where she'd fought her hardest battle. Tomorrow she'd start a new chapter, a new mission, a new way to serve. But today, she allowed herself a moment of peace. She'd been mocked, doubted, silenced, and attacked. She'd lost her job, her reputation, and nearly her faith in the system she'd sworn to uphold. But she'd never lost herself. She'd remained who she was, a Navy nurse, a fighter, a woman who believed that some principles were worth sacrificing everything to defend. Honor, truth, the promise we make to those who serve. Sarah drove out of Riverside as the sun broke through the winter clouds, casting long shadows across the road ahead. She didn't know exactly what the future held, but she knew this. She'd stood up when it mattered most. She'd fought for someone who couldn't fight for himself. She'd paid the price and never wavered. And in the end, she'd won something more valuable than a job or vindication. She'd won her integrity, her honor, her soul. And no one, not Dr. Brennan, not the hospital, not the trolls or the doubters or the people who'd tried to break her, could ever take that away.